Bigger school compound, more classmates, new teachers, longer school hours, buying food on their own. No wonder children take some time to adjust to the new school environment. In this video, I will touch on the key changes in your child's transition to primary school with tips from me and fellow educators so that you can help your child adjust to the new rhythm of primary school life. Hi, I'm Jacinth, a parenting coach and an ex-school teacher. I have 2 kids. My boy is 8 this year and my girl is 6 this year. So if you are like me, you have a child going to primary 1 soon and you're feeling anxious, I feel you. I believe I was more anxious than my son when he went into primary 1 a few years back. Thankfully, my worries were unfounded and I hope to share my tips and experience with you to ease your anxiety. I have also conducted face-to-face and email interviews with several primary school teachers just to get a hang of what's going on the ground in primary school, and I hope these tips can help you as well. Many teachers that are interviewed prefer to be anonymous. I would like to thank all of them who have helped me, including Miss Lu, Miss Hui Sing, Miss Joyce, Miss Serene, and many more. Together, they have decades of experience teaching many subjects like English, math, science, social studies, special needs education, and more. But at this point, I would like to clarify that every school is different and every teacher is different. So whatever that I share in this video may or may not apply in your child's school. In this series of transition to primary 1, you can expect to find all my best tips in 5 episodes. Episode 1 will talk about academic learning. Episode 2, adjusting to the new school environment. Episode 3, developing habits and routines at home. Episode 4, building social-emotional competencies. And finally, Episode 5, the parent-school partnership. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will get all the tips that I share in this video series, Transition to Primary 1. In this video, Part 2, Adjusting to a New Environment, I will touch on a few topics in this sequence. Longer school hours, money and recess, taking responsibility for personal belongings, taking responsibility for learning, self-help skills, and personal hygiene. I am also going to share many general tips towards the end, so stay tuned and watch on. This is going to be a long video, so let's get started. Why do you think children and parents are anxious about this new transition? Because so much of going to primary 1 is unpredictable, and with less predictability, it leads to more anxiety. This means that parents and the children are unsure of what is going to happen in the future, and it causes them to worry. On the contrary, more familiarity leads to more confidence. So when we can equip ourselves with knowledge and have some idea of what is going to happen, even though we don't have full control, it helps parents and kids to be less anxious. So let's make this transition as predictable as we can. I will first talk about some of the changes and how our kids can learn to manage them. School hours are typically from 7:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. and this can be a huge change for children who go to kindergarten, which is about 3 to 4 hours long. Children now have back-to-back classes and there are about 30 students in each class. How can parents help? Tip number 1 is to speak to your kids about the differences between preschool and primary school. You should try to do this at least 1 month in advance. If you have nephews and nieces or friends with kids in primary school, you can get these children to share their stories to your child. I remember having lunch with my friend and her daughter who is in primary school. Her girl shared her primary 1 experience so that my son can get a glimpse of what is going to happen. You can also show your child pictures from the school website or even make a trip down to the school and walk around outside the campus to give your child a better idea. A teacher shared it is important to attend a primary 1 orientation program so that your child can better familiarize with the new environment. When your child receives the student handbook from school, you can also go through the school rules, school values, and certain activities, even CCA, just to get the child excited about what's going to happen in his 6 years of primary school life. Tip number 2 is to show your child a typical timetable of a school day. I remember asking my friend to lend me a copy of the timetable just for my son to take a look. Of course, your child will not have the exact same timetable, but these conversations will encourage our children to be curious, to ask questions about the lessons, to learn about reading the time, the names of the teachers, and more. And knowing how to read the timetable is key so that the children know what lessons to expect and what books to pack for the next school day. A teacher mentioned it takes about 1 semester, about 6 months for children to fully be adapted to the routine. And she said that kids are pretty adaptable, so parents don't have to be too worried. In episode 3, I will teach you tips about how to encourage your children to pack their school bags on their own. Tip number 3 is to teach your kids to tell the time. Like I mentioned, having more predictability leads to less anxiety. Can you imagine going about your day not knowing what time is it? So when kids know what time they're going to have their recess, when are they going to see you at the gate, it eases their anxiety. Buy a watch for your child and teach them how to read the time. Now, your kids don't have to be 100% competent in telling the time to the minute, because this is a topic that will be taught in the math syllabus in primary 1. So you can just teach your child the basics, for example, telling the time to the hour or half an hour. I also encourage that you buy an analog watch instead of a digital watch, because your kids need to learn how to read the time from looking at the hour hand, minute hand, and the face of the watch. This is what your child is going to learn in school as well. After your child has learned to read the time, that is when you can change to a digital watch if he or she asks for it. Because of the late release, children will now have a recess and a snack break in class. According to the teachers I spoke to, many kids enjoy this snack break session. Snack break and recess are about 2 hours apart or more. My son's recess is at 8:30 and his snack break is about 11:30. This also means that the child will have lunch later than usual. Now, with a child going to primary school, it affects the entire family, because then we'll have to have a later lunch and it will affect the dinner time as well. And it's even more complicated if you have a younger preschooler at home and they have to eat lunch earlier. But don't worry, I'm sure you can adapt and adjust. So let me share how we adjusted. My girl will still have her lunch at about 12:30 and my son will have his lunch at about 2:15 after his bath. Because the late lunch will affect his dinner, which is at 6 p.m, that I will not shift because we are very particular about the amount of sleep that they get at night. I will then give him a slightly lesser lunch, knowing that he has ate at his snack break. I know of some parents who prepare quite a heavy snack break for their kids so that they won't have to be hungry, and you can definitely do that as well. Now let's hear what the teachers suggest about snack break. Tip number 1 is to pack healthy lunch boxes. This is so as to keep the kids sufficiently full, but not so full that they can't have their lunch after. Tip number 2 is to teach your kids how to have meals in class properly. A teacher shared that children tend to eat and walk around and talk to their friends and start dropping food, and they don't even know how to clean up on their own. So make sure that you give your kids practice on packing their lunch boxes back after they are done, cleaning up if they make a mess, and to teach them how to put their lunch boxes back into their bags properly. This is something we cannot assume that all kids know how to do. This is a huge change because now children can handle money on their own without their parents. It's like a newfound superpower that the kids can make decisions on what they want to eat and what they want to buy. At the same time, this power can be overwhelming for children. Kids need to decide what to eat, where to queue, how much change to receive, and where to sit after eating, and how much time they have left before they have to go back to class. While it can sound too much to handle, we can definitely guide our children. Here are some tips. Let's first talk about money. Tip number 1, do not give your kids too much money. The teachers have advised not to give our kids too much money because if they lose the money, it creates more anxiety. A teacher shared that a child had up to $30 in his wallet and he doesn't know how to handle the money. The school will advise how much money is sufficient. For my child, I gave him $2 a day. I know that some schools accept digital payments, but for me, I prefer my kids to hold real cash so that they can better appreciate the value of money. But this is just my personal opinion, so it's really up to you on how you want to give your kids the pocket money. To develop independence in your child, I suggest letting your kids be in charge of the pocket money every day. And this is what I mean. I get this pill box where I will put $2 in the first 5 compartments from Monday to Friday on Sunday night. So every morning it is my child's responsibility to take the $2 on his own. Now, of course, you might be worried, what if my child forgets to take the money? So my tip number 2 is to give your kids an emergency fund. There will be days where the child forgets to take his pocket money, lose his wallet, or even need extra money to purchase, for example, an exercise book from the bookshop. This is all part of learning. So with this emergency fund, I will slot a $2 note at a side pocket in my son's bag, and to remind him that if he ever needs extra money, he can always use the emergency fund. There was once that my son forgot to bring his water bottle and he forgot about the emergency fund as well. So after buying his food, he didn't have much money left, so he didn't get to drink water. And I think this is all part of learning. From then on, he remembers that there is an emergency fund in his bag. Tip number 3 is to give small change to your children. The chapter on money will not be taught so early in the math curriculum. So don't give your kids big notes like $5 or $10 because the child will not know how to count the change that he or she needs to get back. Some teachers suggest just giving coins so it's easier for the children to manage. But for my son, because he's quite okay with counting money, I actually gave him a mix of dollar notes and coins so that he can learn to count money. My friend Meru taught me a very valuable tip. So to teach your kids the permutation of money. She said there was this girl who brought a $1 coin at recess. But when she came home, she didn't buy any food because she told the mother that the food was 50 cents and she did not have 50 cents. So the girl didn't realize that $1 is made up of two 50 cents. So take some time to let your kids handle money before going to primary school. You can even get your child to practice buying things outside. Just recently, I got my girl to buy a drink on her own, and it gives them confidence as they interact with money so that they don't feel so anxious. But here, I want you to be rest assured that the canteen vendors and the teachers in the canteen will help the child. The canteen vendors know that these primary 1 kids are very new to school, and in handling money, they will definitely give the correct change to the children. Tip number 4 is to teach your kids how to budget their allowance. There will be children who are more excited about buying stationery from the bookshop than eating. I suggest going through with your kids the difference between needs and wants, and I use some books to help my girl. The 2 sets of books that you can go through with your kids will be Money Friends, and the other series is the Honey Bunny series. Now we're done with money, let's talk about ordering food. The canteen can get crowded and chaotic at times. If the buddy system is back, your primary 1 child will be paired with an upper primary buddy who will be with your child when buying food. Otherwise, there will be teachers and prefects stationed at the canteen to help your child. Some tips here. Number 1 is to encourage your child to buy food on their own at the food court. The food court probably resembles the canteen the most, so you can get your kid to look at the menu to decide what they want to eat, learn to queue up, order food, and make payment with their cash in their hands. Tip number 2 is to take pictures of the canteen and the menu list. Some children are clueless about what to eat, so for these kids, you can then go through the menu list at home in advance so that they can feel confident about knowing which store to go to. As the child gets better with buying food, you won't need to go through the list anymore. So talk about your kid's favorite food and what does he or she wants to eat. This will help your child look forward to going to school. You can even do some pretend play like you are the canteen vendor, you are selling food to your girl. Tip number 3 is to teach your kids to order food politely. Some teachers have mentioned that children these days are pretty rude when they order food. They forget about their P's and Q's. So like I mentioned about the pretend play, you can get your kids to practice ordering food. May I have the fishball noodles, please? At home, you can also teach your kids to return the plates and utensils to the sink because this is what they need to do in the canteen when they're done. Tip number 4 is to teach your kids time management at recess. What you can do is to create like a recess time at home and set a time limit of maybe 30 minutes. So this will give your kids a concept of how much time they have to finish their food. So for children who usually eat quite slowly, you can start to get them to practice to take bigger mouths and chew faster. If your kids are not foodies like mine, I know this is a tall order. I think we can start small by taking baby steps. Maybe you can set a visual timer for the child to see how much time he or she has left to eat, but avoid pressuring or nagging at your children because this can add more stress to the child, and it might backfire. The kids might even end up eating even slower. Question: what if your kids refuse to buy food at recess? My son used to buy food at recess, but since the kids have recess play, he prefers to play rather than eat. So I went to find out from the teachers and other parents, and I realized that there are quite a number of kids who do this. So while I'm worried about his food intake, I do notice that the more I nag and insist that he buy, the more resistant he becomes. And I would rather he tell me honestly if he ate at recess or not instead of lying to me. So what I do is to make sure that he has a full breakfast at home, and I pack a little bit more for his snack break. We have also discussed and come to agreement that he will buy food on certain days of the week. So these are baby steps that we are taking to help him eventually learn to eat faster and learn to buy food faster so he can play with his friends. I'm sharing this here with you because while we are very stressed out about our kids' nutrition and all, the parent-child relationship is still the most important. Even if your kids tell you that they did not eat at recess, please don't nag at them or start judging them. The last thing you want is them telling you that they ate when they did not. Let your kids know that they are now responsible for their own personal belongings, such as their school bag, their wallets, water bottles, stationery, books, pencil case. But kids being kids, you have to expect that they're going to lose some of their items. My son has lost his erasers and water bottles a couple of times, and I just have to remind him how to be careful. So here are some tips. Tip number 1 is to teach your kids how to take care of their belongings. I will tell my kids to always turn around and take a quick look to see if they left anything behind. For example, when they get down the car or they leave the library. Of course, they will not do this all the time, but with reminders and practice, it will slowly become a habit. A teacher also suggests to teach their kids how to keep their stationery once they are done with them. In schools, the pencils, erasers, and color pencils are strewn all over the table, and the teachers find that this clutter is actually affecting the students' ability to focus and pay attention. Tip number 2 is to label everything. Kids are now allowed to leave their books and personal items in school, so you can imagine with 30 students leaving books in class, sometimes things will get misplaced. The school will remind you to, but please label all the belongings that your kids have and let them be the one to label. Give your child a sense of ownership, so your child can, paste the name stickers on the books or even write them, and even on every single color pencil. So when the child does it, he or she will take ownership for their own belongings. Tip number 3 is to teach your kids what to do if they lose their belongings. There is usually a lost and found corner, and the kids can go to that corner to look for the items that are missing. Otherwise, you can teach them to tell the teachers, classmates, or any school staff about the items that they have lost. With 1 teacher to 30 students, it can be challenging for teachers to give full attention to each child. Hence, it is important for your child to practice listening when instructions are given to them. Tip number 1 here is to practice giving verbal instructions. During your daily interactions, practice giving 1 to 2-step verbal instructions to your kids. This is to get them into the habit of listening, paying attention, and managing their impulses. Avoid nagging every day because this will cause them to tune out and they don't get into the habit of listening when someone is giving instructions. If your child is often distracted, I want you to practice looking at your child in the eye. Get the attention first before you tell your kids what you want him or her to do. For example, I will tell my girl, you have 2 things to do. 1, change out of your pajamas. 2, put your pajamas back into the laundry basket. Can you tell me how many things you have to do? Tip number 2 is to practice copy work. Most of the information will be relayed directly to your child. So your child, in order to remember what he or she has to do, has to write it down in the student handbook. They will have to write down their homework, maybe any items to bring, or any important information that they need to tell their parents. So let your kids practice writing at home. You can provide fun opportunities for kids to practice copying. For example, if they want to write a card to their grandparents, then you can write the word happy birthday on a piece of paper, and the child can then copy the words over to the card. Or for example, you need to head to the supermarket to get some groceries, you can write down the list and maybe get your kids to practice copying onto a post-it that he or she can bring up. At the beginning, you will have to hand-hold a little to teach your kids how to write. So what I teach my kids to do is not copy letter by letter. So you don't look at one letter and write a letter, but instead you think about 2 or 3 letters, try to remember it and write it down. Don't forget to appreciate and give effective praise to your child if he or she can copy well. Tip number 3 is to let your child tell you about any homework or test that he has on his own. Some eager parents will rummage through the bags and look for homework and ask the kids to do it. But by doing so, the kids lack the practice of remembering that they have homework to do, and they will start to rely on their parents. A teacher shared this anecdotal experience. She asked the child, "Why is your homework not done?" And the child said, "Because my mommy worked late last night, so I couldn't do it." Unfortunately, this child relies on the parent to get his homework done. In video 3, I will give you tips to empower your kids by setting up a routine. But yes, let your kids take responsibility for his own learning. Don't try to intervene and rescue him. Even if your child forgets his homework, it is okay. This experience itself is a more effective teacher than you nagging and punishing your child. I said no to nagging, but here I'm going to nag at you. Please do not do the homework for your child. If they need help, don't tell them the answers directly. Instead, teach them how to look for the answers, for example, referring to the textbook. It is the process of figuring out the answers that teaches them to be independent. Also, Don't erase the mistakes and make sure that the homework is a perfect one. Because teachers use homework as a source of information to identify the child's learning gaps. If everything is correct, the teacher is going to assume that the child understands everything that the teacher has taught, which may or may not be true. The child might be struggling in certain areas and we want to help the child. Unlike preschool, the teacher will not be available to help every child change or bring them to the toilet. Hence, we should equip our kids with self-help skills and teach them to be mindful of their personal hygiene. It starts from home. Tip number 1 is to teach your kids to practice dressing themselves. At home, let your kids practice buttoning and unbuttoning their own shirt, their skirts, and their pants. Let them practice with the actual school uniforms. This will then equip them with skills so that they know what to do when they have to change in and out of their PE attire or when they need to use the toilets, which leads me to my next tip. Tip number 2 is to teach your kids how to use the toilets on their own. If your child attends preschool, there's a high chance that he or she knows how to use the toilets. And at home, we can further support them by teaching them how to clean up their bottoms when they're doing their big business. This is another interesting story that I heard from the teacher. There's this student whose grandmother has been telling her not to use the toilets outside home because they're very dirty. As a result, the child is very afraid of using the toilets in school. And that will lead to a lot of anxiety, especially when she feels the need to use the toilet. As a result, toilet accidents happen. So instead of imposing your ideas on children, it is highly encouraged that you teach your kids how to use the toilet. For example, I'm very specific when I teach my kids. I'll teach her how to use the toilet paper, how to fold it, how to clean the toilet bowl seat, and how to clean up and how to flush the toilet. So I show her exactly step by step how it's done, and now when we use the toilet, I will not help her, I will look at how it's done and I will guide her along. Tip number 3 is to teach your kids how and when to ask for permission. A teacher shared that there was a child who is constantly raising her hands and asking to go to the toilet. This is because her mother taught her to always use the toilet even though she's not urgent. As a result, this is very disruptive for her and the entire class. This is the time to teach your kids how to wait for appropriate pauses to ask to go to the toilet. This is similar to practice when you are having a conversation with your partner and your kids have to learn to wait for pauses before they ask. For us at home, I will make my kids raise their hands before they can ask questions if someone is in the middle of a conversation. Tip number 4 is to normalize toilet accidents. When we make a big fuss out of soiled underwear or toilet accidents, children might end up feeling shamed and embarrassed. We need to understand that our kids are still learning, so we have to be more compassionate. I've also heard that school cleaners of the same gender will help children who need help with using the toilet. Even if the child experiences any toilet accidents, schools have extra sets of uniforms. They also have disposable underwear that the children can put on. So parents, you can be rest assured that your child will not be left alone. But of course, I cannot speak for all schools, so if you are concerned about your child who is not yet ready to use the toilet on his or her own, you might want to inform the form teacher on the first few days of school. Tip number 5 is to make washing hands a habit. At home, make sure your kids are used to washing hands before and after meals and when they return home. This is a good habit whether they are going to primary school or not. But in primary school, nobody will nag at your child and remind your child to wash his or her hands. It has to be a habit so the child is more aware of his personal hygiene. If you have made it to this far of the video, thank you for watching. I hope you have found these tips valuable. You can always re-watch it and write down the different tips. So far I have covered the different topics on longer school hours, money and recess, taking responsibility for personal belongings, taking responsibility for learning, self-help skills, and personal hygiene. Now I'm going to share some general tips about adjusting to a new school environment. Firstly, most kids are adaptable, so the teachers have assured me that as parents we don't have to be too worried. Instead, we just have to take steps to develop skills and habits in our children so that they can make progress in learning and become independent. The other tip is to talk positively about your own school experience and make it exciting so that your child do not feel that they're going to go through this huge change alone. When you tell your own stories, children can relate better. Next, pretend play and reading books about first day of school are very helpful to reduce the anxiety for children on the first day. So pretend play, like I mentioned about setting up a store and you can be the canteen vendor selling food, or you can even do a pretend play of in a classroom and the teacher in front giving instructions, your child doing copy work. The other tip is to make sure that your child can memorize your contact number Or if not, write it down on a piece of paper and put it in his wallet or school bag. Then you can assure him that in case of emergencies, he can still call you. Some schools have a payphone, so you can give your kids like 10 cents to call back. Otherwise, they can always go to the general office to get help. So far, my son has not called me. I think the school has helped them to adjust well, so don't worry too much. My final tip is to give your child time to adapt. We have to manage our expectations. It is unrealistic to expect a child to be able to adjust to a school in a week. Depending on your child's temperament, it can take up to a month, half a year, or even a whole year. It is okay for them to be nervous. It's okay for them to make mistakes. These are all part of learning, and your job is just to be your child's cheerleader. In the next video, I will go into the habits and routines to develop independence in your child, as well as tell you about how you can set up an after-school routine. I would appreciate if you can share this transition to Primary 1 video series with your friends whose kids are going to primary school. You will be helping many other children. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. I'll see you in the